Hi. I usually do Bible studies here on GodTube and on YouTube, but today I'd like to do something a little different. I received a message not too long ago from one of my GodTube friends, and the subject of her message was, "How did you two meet?" And immediately my mind went to, how did me and my wife meet? How did we get together? But then as I read her message, she said in there that she was curious as to how Michael met Jesus. And that was kind of surprising but refreshing. And I thought, it's been years since I've really given a testimony. When I first got saved, I used to love to tell people how I got saved, and I even, when you first get saved, you get to do it in churches and so forth. So I thought I'd just give my testimony today and hope it's an encouragement and a blessing to anyone who might happen to listen to it. As a young child, I was one of 4 boys. I was the second oldest. My brother Terry was the oldest. I was considered a good kid, and he was considered kind of like a bad kid. Terry had some real problems, and later on in life he went down wrong paths often. I remember as a young kid, I started smoking early at the age of 12 years old. I smoked Lucky Strikes in those days, and I actually had a habit and smoked from 12 till I was I guess I was 13. I was 13 years old till age 26. I remember going to a science field trip one day in elementary school, and we were going to Mammoth Cave in Ohio, and I wrote this letter, and I forged my mom's name saying my son has permission to smoke on this field trip. I gave it to my science teacher, Mr. Mack, and I remember him reading it and said, okay, and I sat up front with him because he smoked too, and he was smoking cigarettes, and I sat up there feeling like a big shot, but I just really had a habit and was smoking my cigarettes too. I also started drinking beer, and when I was an early teenager, my brother and myself and a couple other fellows, we knew these 2 girls. We were early teens, and they were mid to late teens. And their father owned this grocery store, and we'd go there about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. We'd sneak out of the house and walk down to their store there, and they would come out and they would have stowed maybe 2 or 3 6-packs of beer and a couple 3 or 4 packs of cigarettes, and we went to this graveyard that was next door to them, and we just drink beer till it was gone and smoke cigarettes and kind of talk about anything and everything. But I do remember, even during those times when my brother was always in trouble, and he was having troubles at school and so forth, and I was doing good in school, but I was trying to be like him, that I still, at that early age, always felt drawn to the things of the Lord. I remember somewhere along the line someone bought me one of those Bible story books, not a Bible, but a Bible story book, but they were pretty accurate. It was real thick. It had pictures in it. But I used to sit down in my room, and we had a little desk there, and I read that thing from front to cover, and it always fascinated me, and I always felt something whenever I read things like that. But time went on, became a teenager. We did then, when I was around, I guess just before I went to high school, my first year of high school, which was considered the 9th grade then, we moved to Florida. And in Florida, Terry continued to go down the wrong path, and he had already had some run-ins with the law. He had stolen cars, and I had gone with him a couple times when he took little joyrides stealing cars, and I was still smoking then and still drinking a little bit, not as much. But in Florida, I remember as a teenager there in Florida, a few times I heard Billy Graham crusades on TV. And I remember one day I was on my way out the door, and Billy Graham was on, and something he said just made me stop my tracks, and I stood there and listened to the rest of his sermon and his altar call, and wanted to do something, but I didn't. And I walked out the door then. So my life went on like that. I finally joined the Army, and in the Army I started drinking seriously. I was in the Army drinking, when I was in Germany, about maybe a quart of whiskey a day. I used to drink Seagram 7. And I couldn't get up in the morning without shaking, and I'd have to take 2 or 3 fingers of bourbon or blended whiskey just to settle down and calm down. And I didn't think it was too much of a problem until one day I was out I was kind of hungry. It was about mid-morning, so I walked over to the PX. They had a little snack bar there, and I got me a bacon and egg sandwich, which I love, on toast. And I went outside, and I started to eat it on the way back to the barracks. I took a couple bites, and it made me sick, and I threw up. So I went back to my barracks, opened my locker, and took out a quart of whiskey. There was about a half a quart left, and I took a big slug off of that, and that stayed down just fine. And I thought to myself, uh-oh, I think I'm in trouble when food makes me sick, but whiskey doesn't. So anyway, time went on. I got out of the Army, went back to Florida, and of all places, I got a job in a liquor store, working at Walgreens in the package store. And it was there that I also went to the drugstore side eventually, and I was just a stock boy there and did get promoted to assistant manager. But while I was there, I met this cosmetician who worked, she worked days, and I used to have to go around the registers and check out the money, get the money out of there and so forth, and check their tapes. And I thought this girl was very nice. She was hot. A redhead girl, very mysterious and quiet, and it turned out that Donna also was kind of interested in me. So one thing led to another. I eventually did get up enough nerve to talk to her and have coffee with her, and we smoked a cigarette or two at the counter, and then she had to go back to work. But eventually I did ask her out. We did begin to date a little bit, but not a lot. She had been married and was divorced, but the divorce wasn't quite gone through. She had 2 boys. Well, when the divorce went through, we started dating in earnest, and about a year after I'd met her, I proposed to her. We did get married, adopted the 2 boys, and we've been married for over 40 years now. I'm still married to her. The first year or so of our marriage, actually, even though it was nice, it was pretty rocky because I was still drinking heavily. I remember, though, that eventually my mother was in the hospital and her pastor came to see her. And her pastor then, my mother sent her pastor over to see Donna, who was also in the hospital. And she said, "You need to see my husband, talk to him." Well, he did come to the house and he visited us. And he was a Bob Jones University graduate, which has a reputation, I guess, for being somewhat strict and so forth. But he was the kindest, most patient, pleasant man I'd ever met. So I came to our house one evening, and he said, "Let's go to the dining room here and sit down." And he kind of took charge of the whole thing, and I was okay. We sat down. He began explaining the gospel to me. And he told me how that Christ, it's amazing. Just thinking about those days and that time still brings tears to my eyes. Sorry. Anyway, he told me the gospel, he explained it to me, and I believed it. And I got saved right then. Just when he told it to me, he says, "Whosoever believeth should not perish but have everlasting life." And then he went on, though, for some time. He went on explaining. It was funny. And I was already saved, but I went through the motions. He said, "Okay, let's bow your head." I bowed my head. He said, "Ask Jesus into your heart." I asked Jesus into my heart. I confessed my sins and that I believed in him, but I knew I was already saved. Well, from that moment on, life was different. Man, I had a hunger for the Word. I got a Bible, and Ken Carr, the man who led me to the Lord, spent hours with me, helping me study the Scriptures. Eventually, I took a course from the Moody Bible Institute, a correspondence course in the Old Testament, and read through the whole Old Testament, studied it, and then read through the New Testament. And the Lord, from the beginning, opened up times of being able to teach the Word, and I loved teaching and sharing God's Word. And one thing led another. We eventually, about a year after we were saved, just 1 year, and we had some good Bible teaching in a Brethren church in Florida, Grace Brethren Bible Church. But after that, then we joined New Tribes Mission, went to their training camp. Took us 2 times to get through that. And once we got through that, Donna had some hip problems and couldn't go to the field. She wasn't released physically. So for a year, I pastored a little church in Florida. I also I was a chaplain in Orange County Jail in Florida. I taught in some Bible schools and colleges in Florida as an adjunct professor. Did lots of things. Eventually, we did get to the field of Senegal, West Africa. We spent 3 years there, and then we had to come home for health reasons. I ended up on staff at one of our Bible institutes, and left that about 19, I guess it was 90, 85, somewhere between 85 and 90. And I just, ever since then though, I still love the Lord. It's been 40-some years, and He's been everything to me, and I know I'm going to heaven based not on anything I did or didn't do, but based solely on the fact that Christ loved me enough to die for my sins, and He's alive now, and I accepted that. I hope this has been encouragement to you and encourage you to share your testimony.